So it seems that magic worked, and here we are. Hope everybody is in the track he or she wanted to be. And so I'm John Fonrodona at the IES Business School in Barcelona, and I've been asked by Carolina to be the moderator of this session. We have 5 papers, and all of them are related to the idea of bringing all this discussion and all these concepts into practice. So have a lot of, all the papers are related to performance somehow, and how we move from the ideas to the practice and the real world, and how we put all these things into practice. So my main role is going to be to keep track of the time. So we have each one of the presenters, you have 18 minutes overall, 15 minutes for your presentation and 3 minutes for questions and answers. But if you are even shorter in your presentation, you will have more time for discussion. That hopefully people will have some questions for you. So that being said, let's start because we are already late. Let's start with the first paper. I just follow the order that I was given. So the first paper is by Habib Bolaji Yahi. Habib is there. I guess I didn't pronounce their last name quite well, but sorry about that, Habib. And he's from Turku School of Economics, and is going to talk about firm environmental, social, and governance performance, the relevance to profitability and value. So Habib, if you have some document to share, you can share your own presentation by yourself.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen now.
Great. Remember, 15 minutes. I will give you a warning when you have 5 minutes left.
Yes. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Can you see my screen now, please?
Not yet.
I'm not sure why not.
Now it's coming, I think. Yeah, there we are.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you for this opportunity, everyone. And well, from the last time where this the abstract was submitted, there's been a lot of presentations since then. So the title has changed a little bit. So, but anyway, the content is still very much the same. So this is a paper together with Mika Vyakowski, who is also in this audience. And we have tried to evaluate the relationship between ESG performance of firms and the profitability and valuation of these firms. And we have used the data on Nordic countries. So I'm going to go straight to the motivation of these studies. So basically, most recent studies in this area has been done in the United States of America or less ESG developed nations like the Asian market or South America, for example.
Habib, sorry, your slides didn't change on the screen, so I guess you want to share the second slide right now.
Okay. I'm not sure what's going on.
Presentation, it's one of the icons at the.
Yes, I've done that. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I see.
Okay, what about now, please?
Okay, but you have to remember to click on the next slide when you switch between slides.
Yes. All right. Then so most of the studies have been done in, sorry about the break. Then most of the studies have been done in the United States and less ESG developed nations. And I've given some reference of such here. Also, typically most of the studies have been done within a shorter sample period, typically less than 10 years. And similarly, measures of performance has been maybe probably return on asset, return on equity, Tobin's Q, share price or returns, but usually it's either one or the other of these measures have been used at a time, not typically all of this. So, and also a very common thing is that regional analysis in this area have been done holistically. So for example, if you are looking at North America, typical studies in the South America, for example, can be done just covering the whole region as a whole, and conclusion is drawn from this analysis without considering country level analysis, such as maybe how characteristics of the Brazilian market or Argentinian market can influence the result of this or the relationship of these two variables or important variables. So essentially, these factors that have been mentioned can affect the direction of the relationship. It can affect whether there is a positive relationship between ESG and firm performance, a negative relationship, and whether there is no relationship at all, which has been documented in the literature as well. So then our contribution basically is that we have employed Nordic country sample data that represent a kind of region with profound history in pioneering and fostering ESG. So for example, we know that the gender quotas for corporate boards was pioneered in Norway. So this is quite a fundamental issue in ESG performance of firms, for example. So, and again, we considered country level ESG performance analysis and try to compare it with the holistic relationship analysis, which is predominant in the literature, and see whether there is a significant difference in how we can conclude from this analysis and try to draw some kind of inspiration for further research in this area of studies in the future. And similarly, we used both present focused measure of performance, which is ROA, and also Tobin's Q, which is forward-looking. It can show the potential of firm in area of performance, I mean the Tobin's Q. So this can eventually tell us, for example, in most studies where negative relationship has been found with ESG, negative relationship between ESG performance and firm performance have been found. Some of those studies have used predominantly ROA, and we know that in the calculation of ROA, we have net income and also the total asset of a firm. And when you are going towards a more sustainable approach, I mean ESG approach of operation and such, it's kind of tell on the net income of the company, because it requires some huge investment as well. So this can show a negative relationship between this and firm performance. But we have included Tobin's Q so that we can also capture the prospect of the company for in the future. And as well, we considered high and low ESG performance relationship. So is it enough that a company just have ESG score, or it is more important that the ESG score are high scores? So, and also we try to, now we are looking at the differences that can be because of this unstandardized nature of ESG score. Is it so that when you have a score today and there's typically documented evidence that this score can be changing frequently within time, there's backfilling bias and such. So we want to see whether this is significant enough for conclusion in the relationship between ESG performance and firm performance. And also we take a quick look at the sample, I mean the data that we have used. And generally the idea here is the highlighted part here, we show that we have documented a time when this data is downloaded, because this is quite important for analysis. This can affect replication of the paper or something of sort, because if these scores keep changing from time to time, it might be difficult for you to have similar results in the future. And that's one of the things that we are trying to see in our work in the future now. So, and representatively, we have overall 195 firms in our sample, but initially we have 1,651 firms. And the idea where we have shown this chart is to show that even at that, because some of these firms have not enough financial data to make our analysis, to achieve the analysis of this study. So we have enough firms, which is around 195 firms, having both financial and ESG data for the sample period. So, but eventually we can see here that the statistics show that this is a representative data that is good enough for conclusion and valid analysis. And this is how we have designed our hypothesis and model specification. So we don't, there are some, the relationship between firm performance and ESG is been examined in the literature for, well, about 20 years or more now. So we have only focused more on, in this presentation, on those additions that we have made to the literature. So the first is that we have shown that we are considering this analysis at country level. That's the first that I show here. And the next one is that we are looking at the differences in high ESG and low ESG relationship with Tobin skew and ROA. And similarly, we in previous analysis on environmental sensitive industries, these are industries that are found in industries where firms that are found in industry like oil and gas, like manufacturing, where they have more impact on the environment than others. So studies that have been done in this area have used share price as a measure of performance. But in this our analysis, we have used ROA and Tobin skew, which can also show that this is, of course, in financial research, this is a proven measure of firm performance. And similarly, we have a variable called financial slack. And financial slack is just the current ratio of the firm. And here we are considering whether a high financial slack for a firm can impact how they perform in ESG. So, and this is what we have tested here. So we are testing the moderation effect of financial slack on ESG performance of firm. So, and I'm just going to go through the most important results in our paper. So the first here that we can see is that for only significantly, we can see that social score have a positive relationship with ROE, but governance has a negative relationship with ROE. Of course, some studies have shown in the past that some of this quota system or mandatory quota system by board members can have some, well, not so positive influence on the profitability of firms, because some of these members might not be up to the task of the responsibility that is given to them, but because of the regulatory circumstances, they still have to be included in the board. So, but anyway, for firm valuation, we can see that all of these pillar scores and the overall ESG score have positive relationship with firm performance. I mean, in terms of valuation, which is very much interesting and very much what we expect, at least in the study on sustainable finance. But again, this is an evidence why we need to look into country level analysis. We can see here that there is no static performance for a particular firm. Here we have different firms in the Nordics, different countries in the Nordics. We have Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. And we can see that at no time was any of this country performing above others. It's always like it is changing over time. And this is why it is important that we don't make an holistic conclusion when we are looking at regional analysis in this regards. So this is actually on average. And similarly, we look at the median score.
4 minutes, Habib, 4 minutes.
Okay, then this is just some additional analysis. But anyway, I'll move to the next results. This result is the result coming from our country level analysis. And as we can see here, initially, we didn't have any relationship between the overall ESG score and profitability of a firm. But here we can see clearly that when we disintegrate this into country level, we can see that for Sweden and Denmark, we have a significant and positive relationship with ROA. And similarly, for the environmental score, which we didn't have in the holistic analysis. This is something that is interesting. And this shows that for studies on this kind of topic, that we know that there is legislation that can affect firm performance in their own country. We cannot make holistic conclusion as regards the relationship between ESG performance and firm performance. So then I'll move to the conclusions, I mean, the findings of our research as a whole. So we found that there's a positive relationship between social pillar score and ESG, and firm profitability. But a negative relationship, like I showed, exists between this and firm performance, between governance score and firm performance in profitability. So, and similarly, we noticed that for all ESG score and the individual pillar score, there is a positive relationship between it and firm valuation. But for it is more important for firms to have high ESG score. It is not enough to just have ESG score. Now the world is moving towards that. How much are you performing in this regards of ESG? It's not just about you just reporting something to us. And we have seen that in our analysis. And similarly, we noticed that financial slack is associated with higher ESG impact of on firm profitability and valuation. But for ESI firms, there's no significant difference between it and other firms in other industries. So in conclusion, we can say that our study already provides insight to managers who can now actively pursue ESG-related projects and practices with increased valuation in mind. Because this has to do, for example, when we consider topics of shareholders, myopic shareholders, and long-term and short-term oriented shareholders and their influence on the performance of firms in ESG, for example. And we can see that investors and, for example, now we have these topics of ESG activism. So for some investors who are more interested in sustainability, they can now see that this actually is one of the things, incentive to firms, that ESG is not actually value decreasing. It's also it gives some kind of possibility for firms to prosper as well. So, and for creditors who might use this, for example, banks who might use this to finance firms and the rest, and also for policymakers who can now channel more efforts to developing more standardized ESG ratings. So this will be the end of my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity and listening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Habib, also for being on time. Is there any question from the audience? Raise your hand or just talk.
So if I may allow, thank you very much, Habib, for your presentation. It was just a quick question. What do you think is negatively related with specifically with the governance indicator? I think I just want to know your opinion. What are your hypotheses of this?
Well, actually, when we want to consider that, we have to look at what are the components of this governance score. For example, in it, you have management, you have shareholders, and you have responsibility. So now if you look at it, for example, we have talked about management. In management, I talk about the quota system. Well, I'm not in position to say this with my mouth full, because my research is not so specific to that area. But we have seen in the literature that, for example, when this idea of gender quota system was coming up, there was some resentment to the fact that it is giving some pressure on firms to even give responsibility to people who are not qualified to occupy this position. And we know that for any component to prosper, it requires some brilliant minds and some input from the management. And as well, like I mentioned, if you look at the shareholder aspects, for example, we know that the shareholders has a very important role to play in the activities of the firm. I mean, the direction the firm goes into. So it is still not very clear whether the orientation of the shareholder, whether short-term oriented or long-term oriented, can have an effect. And actually, this is one of the things that we are looking at in our subsequent research. We are looking at how these owner types can influence performance of firms in ESG. So, well, that's what I can say for now. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Okay, Irina wants to, yeah.
Hi, Habib. Thank you for your absolutely amazing presentation with a lot of useful data. My question is about this difference in profitability for the companies between the countries. Any hypothesis in terms of regulation and how, let's say, national regulation may impact that?
Okay, well, I can say briefly about that. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to share the paper. It was just an abstract. So, but I hope that in the future, when it is published, people can get to read it. So one of the things that is in the Nordics is that despite the fact that they have a kind of similar ways of approaching this ESG, there's still the difference in the implementation. And there's quite some work that has been done by the Nordic nations to try to kind of bring together these differences and the similarities and kind of present to the world, and how you can follow that by seeing how they implement these different goals in ESG or SDG goals, for example, and how that can trickle down to the ESG scores. Because, for example, typically you expect that if you are approaching environmental issues in the Nordic as a region, and you also have some country level differences in how you implement it, at what stage do you go into what, and at what stage do you approach what? These are the things that are found in this document. And well, I can share the document also in the link. It can give some insight to what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I have to keep track of the time also for the ones that wanted to ask something. So Rashid, sorry, but maybe if we have time at the end, we can again go back to the papers, but we need to move. So thank you, Habib, and good luck for your next steps with the research. Let's move to the second paper. Adrie Heinsbroek and Florentin van den Ehrenbent, both of the authors are there. Adrie has been involved at the ABIS board for a long time, and so thank you also for your interest in presenting us your ideas and your thoughts on these issues. And you will manage yourself, Adrie or Florentine. You'll see who. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And indeed, apologies for having to listen to me twice on this day, but I will try to keep it short and try to make the link also between what was just asked in the questions about implementation by Habib, but also the question of Rodrigo on governance. And I think that's an interesting one. My colleague Florentine is also here, and she will do the slides, because then I can try to put more emphasis on the story. Please be aware, we are a company, not academics. So be gentle with us. This is our first attempts to try to make something done. Not as brilliant as Habib on all the data, but it's a new field for us. So we try to see with the input of data that we have and the output of results that we witness in companies, is there a sort of link? I'm a bit afraid of saying the word correlation even. So we wanted to test this. We did this combinedly with Glass Lewis, which is a world-known famous company helping investors for voting decisions on board levels and shareholder meetings. So we thought, let's make the combination. Could we to the next slide, please, Florentine? Interesting enough, what is very important is that for investors, as discussed this morning, responsible investors look at risks and opportunities. And they mostly look at how sustainability risk management is organized. So the ESG oversight, the governance structure. And taking that, because governance was seen from the past as a very, very important topic. We just saw it also in the presentation of Habib. So trying to single out the link between governance structure and ESG performance. That's actually the idea behind it. So just singling out one topic, because otherwise it becomes too difficult, and also to test this. And the data used, because I thought I need to bring this up to this academic audience, is partly based on Sustainalytics data and partly based on our own interpretation of the data, meaning the ESG performance, which we reflect on it, is our way how we see the ESG performance. But we wanted to test to see if our result, our conclusion, can be linked to how an oversight structure was done. So the last point on this slide is a short caveat or disclaimer. Yes, we only had it from 1 year, but this is a first test, and to see what comes out of it. And also, I already want to bring this to your attention, that the results, we did publish it, and it got within the finance industry quite some attention, because it helped us to have conversations with clients, companies, and colleagues. And the last one was also very important, because as a change agent, as remarked this morning, I also need to bring in within the company to the next level. So having said that, let's go immediately to the results. Florentine, the next slide, please. Yes, we had 5 key outcomes. I'm going to be so very much in time, Johan, no worries. There are 5 outcomes. And I think the first one is, you could say, it could be worked both ways. Because what we've seen is a focused ESG board committee at a company helps create a better ESG performance. But could it also be that the ESG performance was there because there was a focused board committee. So it is not clear exactly which direction is this correlation or link to be seen. That was for us not easy to distill. The other thing is what we also found, and I'm taking the second and the third bullet a bit combined, is that in Europe, it was a bit higher, the quality of disclosure on how the governance was organized than in the US, probably due to also regulation and reporting rights. And the other thing is, you could say Europe and the US combined also had more focused board committees. What do we mean with focused? That means that it's not a combined committee with all kinds of chiefs of all kinds of C-suite company officials, but much more dedicated on a certain topic. For instance, also mentioned just by Abi, environmental topics. So that means focus. So what you could see is that in Europe and US, there was more focus in the oversight. And interesting enough, could be that also helped. It was not easy to say if that would help in the ESG performance, but it was interesting to say that there were more focused committees in Europe and US. Now, I think for me, one of the most interesting was the fourth one. So the focus is key above the level of where the oversight committee was placed. If it was on board level, but a combined committee, you could see less ESG performance than when it was even a lower situated with lower ranking officials of the company, but with a focused area. Then you could see on that topic, the ESG performance was higher. It's an interesting insight that actually focusing on topics could make it work. So sometimes I translate it in, yes, if you what gets measured gets managed. So maybe that's the case. And for me, it was a bit of a, well, it was not what I usually shout about. So that was interesting to see that this was for me a sort of outcome which surprised me. But on the other hand, it also makes sense currently with the emphasis on environmental topics. The last thing I would like to bring to your attention is indeed that not disclosing information is really not helping the ESG performance. Again, as said this morning, transparency is the mother of sustainability, or was at least at the beginning of responsible investing. Be transparent, showcase. And there you could say that if you are transparent and work on topics, it could help. I'm going to the next slide, and that's the one with a beautiful graph. I want to, especially on your right side, the board level expertise per sector. Really, really interesting view. Also, like Habib said about environmental sensitive sectors, you could see that utilities and energy has a really committed, or in their board, people with experience and expertise on the topic. That was Glass Lewis. We checked all the bios. So interesting enough that on these ecological sensitive sectors, there was a high ESG sustainability expertise. Especially, and I found it strange, and we don't have the answer, so maybe you could help us out here, but on consumer things, like on consumer discretionary, much more with people involved, no expertise. So it's a really interesting thing that on environment, there was much more expertise. Why we found it quite interesting. Also with healthcare, look at it. Committee, only 20% real expertise. Interesting, but it's there is people at healthcare on sustainability expertise, but not in the committees. So for us, it's interesting. Again, I don't have the solution. For us, this was really a sort of way of looking at, hey, where should we explore? Because also these things we can use in our conversation to bring us as change agents to the next level. So I'm only going to the last slide, please. Florentine, yes. Oh, Joanna, I'm so on time. Important enough is indeed transparency is key. That was one of the key learnings, and also one of the things that we shared, especially also with our clients and also with the companies that we meet. So hence we try to bring out of this study, what could we do? And we also brought back to some companies via Glass Lewis on board structure, look, be transparent, because that helps us. It's important for us as investors. Second thing is sound governance. What do we mean with that? That it is important to have a bit of a focus or a committee there with people who know the topic. That can, what gets measured, get managed, but also make sure that you have the managers who are able to measure the topic they are dealing with. So it's interesting enough that was for also important, hence a learning for investors. So not for for much more from what we could do, how we could be a change agent, how we could try to increase the impact. And the last topic, just to bring there for you, is something that we internally brought, because having said this, having some findings, having some insights, how do we go about? So for us, it was extremely important to use this as a starting point for ongoing conversation and to address both concerns and compliments and enable the investor, my colleagues, to be the change agent that we actually want us to be. And of course, I shared with you the link to the full report. It is about 26 pages, more appendix, because we need to than real things, but this is the key. If you know this is the key, it saves you 28 pages of reading. Back to you, Johan, and happy to take any questions.
Thomas has a question for you.
Okay, Thomas.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Adria. Very interesting. Adri, can you define transparency? Now, where I'm getting at, I know it's a tricky question.
Yeah, it is.
We talk about transparency for many years. We had that at Intel. We showed everything. We showed all outcome of the factory and so on. The thing is, it's a tricky thing. Isn't it more that we need some kind of guided transparency?
Yeah.
I mean, people, wouldn't that be the word? People, if you are fully transparent, sometimes people just don't understand. I mean, if you run a chemical company like Intel or BASF or something, people cannot judge. I mean, there's numbers, they don't know what to do with that. So the question is, on one side, question one, how do you guide the people? You know, what does that transparency mean? Otherwise, they don't have some kind of scaling. Mm-hmm. And second, isn't that again then a source for potentially, oh, the company tells me what they think should be good and so on, some kind of guided greenwashing or so, if you see what I mean. So I mean, of course, I love transparency. I think like you, like all of you, of us, transparency is important, but full transparency often doesn't mean a lot to people.
You're absolutely right, Thomas. So having said that, so now I'm already taking the needle out of your beautiful question. So you're right. And of course, with Juan, as a professor in business ethics, I have to be very careful what I'm going to say now. But for me, for us as investors, transparency is maybe the word disclosure, or sharing relevant and material information where we can base our assessment on, but more from the perspective, what I always say, it's not about what I need, what does the company wants to share? So for me, transparency is not how I make sure that it's circumvented, but company, share with me those things that you feel I need to know to be aware or to inform myself and to make a good investment decision. Hence, it is about relevant topics and disclose them, because knowledge without context is also very dangerous. I hope this answers you a bit, because I see also a very good question from Yuri coming up.
Yeah, no, that answers, because I'm actually thinking of having 1 or 2 or 3 of the master theses going into that direction, you know, shedding more light on, you know, transparency in various sectors. That's where I'm coming from. So I wanted to get your opinion on that, and maybe we can work together the next semester.
Let's see.
Because it's just really like, you know, industry based. What actually does transparency mean? And I'm still working a little bit right now on fine tuning that, but then somehow giving it to master thesis. So at the end, maybe having 300 pages of intelligent input from some intelligent students or so, shedding some light on that. So if you're interested, let's work on that.
Let's continue the conversation.
And so, Thomas, sorry, maybe if I can briefly...
no, yeah, Florentine.
That's Florentine.
Oh, sorry,
yeah, sure.
Just briefly add to that, because indeed this is also part of the conversations that we're having, right, with investees, and they're also asking us what is the level of transparency and the level of disclosure that you're actually seeking from us. And I think there's indeed a need for standards here, right? And that's also what we see. So there's, based on materiality, there's SASB that's being used, there's the GRI, there's TCFD, of course, on climate-related metrics. And then what you also see within the more collaborative engagement initiatives that are out there, for example, the Climate Action 100+, is that you will see more and more companies that start to report on these key indicators. As it's such a huge initiative with lots of investors and asset managers and owners that are united in their engagement on climate with the world's biggest emitters. So also there you see that there's some sort of standardization being developed and implemented. But I like the remark that it should be guided transparency. So thanks for that.
I have a second question coming from Yuri. If there is time, a third one from Carol. So Yuri.
Well, thank you. Very briefly, if I can. First of all, Adria, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm really looking forward for looking through this report, the full one. But nevertheless, let's go back to the eggs and chicken approach. What should be the first? I'm wondering from your particular standpoint or standpoint of investment community, can we, so to say, restructure the very approach to ESG criteria and to talk first about G as the first prerequisite for another two sides?
Yeah.
Actually, it will change the whole picture, how to analyze.
Well, yeah, to me, that the G is the last of the three words doesn't mean it's the least important. So be aware of that, especially for credit investors. Governance is extremely important, but it is environmental, social, and governance. And to us, governance is the beginning, because environmental and social outcomes usually are determined by how governance was done. I try to be very brief, because then maybe Carol can ask also the question.
Okay, thank you. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Carol, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for that presentation. It's very interesting. I'm interested in why you chose to go with Sustainalytics. And because as we know, there's so much divergence in the ESG ratings agencies that they compete for market share and they try to be unique in their approach to measuring. So would the results be different if you'd looked, say, at MSCI or another ratings agency?
I don't think so that much, but I have to be here, caveat, because we haven't tested or back tested or done whatever. Because what we did is really single out this one factor about the board committee, and we are using both True Value Labs, Sustainalytics, and ISS data to come on with our ESG performance thing. So it's not, in that sense, there's no bias in our result. And happy to discuss this further, Carol, but maybe because now I'm getting in my time limit with Juan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adri. They're just running, but we have, but perfect. That was in time, and thank you very much to all of you. Let's go to the third paper.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thanks very much. And let's continue the conversation.
Thank you, Adri. So now it's the turn from Rashid Hassan. He's from George Mason University.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, how's it now? You can see it?
Perfect.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning. It's bright and early here in Washington, D.C., next to, I guess you were right outside of the D.C. area. And I'm delighted to be speaking with you, and was pretty impressed with the two presentations that followed, preceded mine, and a lot of synergies and common elements that I think you'll see in my presentation. So what we have done at the business school, we have a center called Business for a Better World, and our hope is how to make business a more positive force in the world. And as a matter of fact, some of the conversation we already heard around ESG, which is one of the metrics that is being used to gauge company performance, we have taken a very audacious step saying we need to be much more holistic in the way we measure companies. And so that's where I'm going to start. So so my topic is going to be, what's the premise for the SVI? Talk a little bit about, we did some assessment of the current metrics provider like Sustainalytics and MSCI and others. And then we'll go into the actual framework that we have developed. Given the shortness of time, I'll just kind of touch on some of the key points and some of the data we're collecting, and then what are some of the next steps we're undertaking in this effort. So the motivation for SPI is that we need a very comprehensive set of measurements to really push companies towards stakeholder capitalism as a business norm. That's kind of the basic motivation. We want to include all the stakeholders. I mean, if you look at the ESG measurements, you typically have a subset of the stakeholders as opposed to the 6 or 7 stakeholders in the company. We want to have a self-assessment tool that the company can use, can access, and do their own self-assessment, like BLab in some sense. We want to also have a manageable set of data, because if you look at the data, some of the company would say, well, they collect 400 data points. Ours is about 104 key data points that we want to have a minimum set that can give us adequate assessment information about companies. And we want to build a platform that basically then can provide information around sector, industry assessment, benchmarking for researchers, for public policy, economic research. And with the hope that this SPI tool could move the company towards more stakeholder capitalism and help achieve the UN SDG goal by providing a set of comprehensive metrics, benchmark, and the data that we hope, maybe over a decade will get us where you want to go. So as part of that effort, we did some assessment of the key provider of various metrics around ESG, CSR, and you see some lists there: BLab, Just Capital, MSCI, World Economic Forum, World Benchmark Alliance, Sustainalytics, and more recently, we have also looked into Refinitiv. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time as far as their pros and cons, but at least it gives a sense that we have looked at the universe of ESG and other metrics provider, and I'll just give a high level assessment of what we see. So here's a little bubble chart. Across, you have on the top, you have all the different providers, and then you have on the left side, all the stakeholders that you consider to be relevant. And if you look at the planet and you kind of go in that row, you can see that a lot of coverage. And that is kind of one of the assessment, is that ESG, a lot of emphasis on the E, not so much on the S and the G. And there has been quite a conversation already around the governance issue. And we'll also get into some of that, because we define governance in a very holistic way. And perhaps one of the issues is that we're trying to, in our effort to link certain aspect of governance to investor return, that maybe the world is much more complex than that one-to-one relationship. So in our view, we look at 7 stakeholders in a business, and including the company itself. So the company, the employee, the customer, the planet, the supplier community, and the shareholder. And we sort of look at this in a holistic, circle of 4 Ps: the planet, prosperity, people, and then a purpose that kind of, in a way, integrates all of it. There is no sense of doing anything unless there's a purpose that is very holistic in terms of not only serving the shareholders, but serving all the stakeholders, and obviously making the world a better place. So here's kind of the crux of what we're proposing as this is a framework we have developed, and a lot of work is getting done here. So for each of the stakeholders, we're defining what we call 3 kind of priorities. So for example, for the company, we look at the financial performance, and I'll get into some detail. What's the definition of financial performance? It's in a bunch of different metrics. Then corporate governance, again, what's the definition of governance? And then you also look at the brand reputation of the company. So that's the 3 major categories. For company, for employee, we look at financial security. Are the company people being paid adequately, living wages, benefits, and other employee empowerment, their ability to engage in conversation, have their voice heard, and then productivity, in the sense that there's enough data to show that the productivity of company have gone up, but the wage has not gone up in the same ratio. So there's a gap. And then the challenge is, are the employee compensated for their contribution to the productivity growth in the company? On the customer side, you look at price value parity. I mean, obviously, the companies are obviously trying to increase price, but probably lowering value, because that's how the profit increases. And we're thinking about, there should be some way to measure the price to value parity. I mean, there's a lot of data to show that even the largest food companies in the world providing food on the shelf that is of substandard, right? How do you measure some of those things? obviously the quality and the brand convergence. We'd think that the quality would then be reflected on the brand of the company. And then also for the customer perspective, what is the corporate social responsibility? How do they measure it from the customer perspective, not from the company perspective? For community, we look at job creation, fair wages. We look at how the company is providing meaningful tax back to the communities and community engagement, and obviously ethics and compliance. For the supplier, we look at fair trade, health and safety of the entire supply chain, and again, ethical compliance and the visibility of the supply chain. For the planet, which is basically the environmental part of it, we look at energy usage as one the key driver, land and resource usage, and the waste management. And for shareholders, this the financial return, ethics and transparencies, and also the rights and privilege of the shareholders vis-a-vis other stakeholders. So that's the basic framework that you have developed. And then I'm just going to give you a peek into a couple of the key areas. So in terms of company, we look at financial performance, which would be revenue growth, share price growth, return on asset, return on equity, different level of income, gross operating and net income. Corporate governance, we look at obviously board diversity, which is in a hot topic in the US. And as a matter of fact, NASDAQ has actually mandated that you want to have at least one female board members. But we think it's beyond diversity, right? Does the board have a sense of purpose? And what is the purpose is? And does the board look at all the stakeholder in an equitable way? So for example, when every quarter the board decides to give out dividends, why isn't that in the same conversation? There's some conversation is the employees being rewarded properly, right? Or in the board, you have got compensation committee who looks at the CEO compensation, the C-suite compensation. Why isn't a similar committee or the same committee looking into everybody's wages and see if this compatible with looking at all the equities? So we define it in a broad way. And then brand reputation, obviously, every company have their own assessment, but we want to see maybe through some crowdsourcing. One of the data source we're looking at is the Net Promoter Score. Maybe there's some other organization that is providing more of an unbiased kind of customer, citizen-driven sense of the reputation of the company. So that's going to give you a sense of how we're trying to define each of the stakeholders' contribution. Looking to the employee, we look at the financial security by meaning that, are they getting living wages? And in the US, there's a lot of conversation around minimum wage and living wage and obviously things that are happening in the Congress. But we put a stake in the ground in saying employee needs to be paid a living wage. And that's how we're going to measure whether employees are having financial security. Do they have benefits? And what's the extent of the benefits? Healthcare, maternity care, paid, holidays for, stock ownership. A lot of companies say we give stock ownership to every employee, but is it significant enough or is it just token? Are there profit sharing? You look at the bucket of profit that is generated, and the bulk of it goes to the shareholders today. 90% of the profit goes to shareholders, right? I mean, how do we begin to think about it? That pot of money should be available to all the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. And how do you kind of think about balancing an equity in the way you treat all the shareholders or all the stakeholders? Employee empowerment. So we looked into racial and gender equity, the equal pay wage gap. We look at safety and health of the employees. We look at employee engagement in terms of their voice being heard. They're engaged in the performance review, work-life balance, which is a major issue all over the world. Skills development training, employee tenure, longevity in the company, and the promotability of, to what extent people get promoted from within versus moving on to other companies, right? So these are all things that, looking from the employee perspective, things that they ought to be looking at, and the company ought to be mindful of those things. We look at productivity and growth. As I said before, productivity has gone up over the years, but wage has kind of stagnated. And why is that? Shouldn't, if your employer is contributing to productivity gain, then there should be a corresponding compensation, whether in terms of raises, in terms of profit sharing. We want to see all of those things happening. So I'm not going to go into the other stakeholders, but
3 minutes, Rashid, 3 minutes.
Sure. Some of the data challenges, we talk about data transparencies. We talk about, out of those 104 data points, we're going to measure companies saying, okay, how many of the 104 data points you're providing publicly? If you're not, if you're providing 50 of them, then you're at 50% transparency. That would be kind of way we're going to define transparency, is to make a point that Thomas brought up. We have been looking at S&P 100 companies as kind of our initial data sets, and basically applying those 104 data points. We're basically looking at the public data sources, and then also doing web crawling, text mining to get the sense of the data. And here's a little sample of what we would like to present to the world. For a company, we'll have kind of a scoring sheet. So if you look at this is kind of a Microsoft, looking at some initial data points, they'll get a score, say 81% out of the 100. And then we'll provide them score across each of the stakeholders, the company, the employee. And then some of the data we're going to be able to share is like, if you look at the top middle section, we have looked at the board composition of the large public retail companies, saying, if you look at African American as part of the population, they are 30% of the population, are the board representative of that census. And you can see that companies like Macy's and Dollar General's is pretty high, whereas Amazon is very much at the bottom in terms of governance. Diversity, if you look at African American perspective, we can do the same thing for gender perspective and other ways. We looked at, looked at company annual report and said, okay, if you look at employee, what is the context in which employee shows up in the way the company describes their so compensation, stock ownership, expense comes in the picture. Another kind of a spider circle where we can demonstrate, the brand reputation of companies, based on some data points like Net Promoter Score. So these are the kind of thing we used to put together. So our next step is basically to finalize our tools and the methodology, extract the data, in a more automated fashion. Right, it's very manually intensive. And we're hoping that by end of summer, we'll be able to provide a score on the top 100 S&P companies as a starting point. And then we'll go into S&P 500 and S&P 1000. Our goal is to provide a platform to be able to do some of this work and let this tool available to the public, to the policymakers, to academic researchers, and others. So I'm going to stop right there, and we can open up for some Q&A.
I guess it's going to be a lot of questions, but we have time only for two. So let's see who wants to.
Thomas, I see.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, Rashid, thank you very much. Actually, if you allow, I might come back to you later on, because I think in the SYE, there's a lot of things we're also doing here in Munich. Quick question here on, if I call it the digital divide or so. I mean, I didn't see that a lot in your presentation. Where is it included? Is it part of the social part of the ESG or so? We talk a lot about digital divide. I mean, it could be, especially when you look at the pandemic or so, people or kids from minority groups or so who don't get the right education. It could be elderly people or so. So digital divide in terms of sustainability and so on will, in my view, I think, and not sure if you see it as well, will play a major role. So what kind of society do you want? So where do you put the word digital divide in your research there?
Yes, I think, we have to kind of go back to see what's the cause of the digital divide, right? It's at the end of the day, it's kind of income distribution. Typically, the people who are in the poor or side of the economy is where you see the lack of access to. So, right, so if the company were to be able to distribute their profit in an equitable way to all the stakeholders, communities, for example, right? I mean, why isn't part of the profit of the company is going to the communities where you have underserved people, with digital divide, challenges. So I think that's going to show up in the community in the way the company engage in serving the community where they are present. Also, it's going to show up in the way the employees are engaging with the community, right? I mean, company have technology and the resources, but that's not being directed to who needs to be served. So I think it's going to be more of a derived. And at the end of the day, we are trying to be, what are the root cause of some of the issues that we see in our society? the poverty, the digital divide, lack of inclusiveness. These are all fundamental to, I think, and a friend of mine who is actually an entrepreneur in the digital world, he basically says people need income and then they can figure out what they need. And that's what I think we are trying to premise, is that many of our work ought to be engaging where we can distribute resources across all the stakeholders. And if we do that, people will be empowered to make sure they need what they acquire what they need. So that would be kind of my high level answers to your, but I would love to connect one-on-one and share some more additional thoughts.
Yeah, we'll follow up. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you see that Thomas is doing his next year research with Adrian, now Rashid, so he's managing very well. Is there any other question? Okay, good. Thank you, Rashid. Very good. Very well done, and good luck. Good luck. So let's move to the next paper. Rodrigo Cambayashi from ESG School of Management. So the floor is yours if you want to share the presentation.
Can you see it now? Can you see my screen?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope the presentation standards are very high, so I'll try my best. My name is Rodrigo Cambayashi. I'm a professor of business ethics and sustainability at the ESG Business School. We're located in Paris, but I'm Mexican. So I've been working a little bit. This is part of what I did on a PhD. And I was working a little bit on the symbols, right? And United Nations Global Compact, as you can know, is one of the largest CSR initiatives in the world. So it was launched in 2000 by Kofi Annan, and it had a great success. So nowadays we have almost 17,000 organizations spread around the world, and we have around 12,000 companies. So that means associations and sometimes cities can join in. And they are basically pleading to respect only 10 principles. These 10 principles might look simpler, but in the moment that you apply them to your internal politics, they might be different and they might have a huge impact on your business. So I'm going to be a little bit off the financial to focus on the ESG performance. So one of the main critics that a Global Compact has received, it has very low entry barriers, right? No matter who can join it, you just sign a letter. There's even a draft on the website that you just basically have to put your name on it if you're the CEO, right? And then you have to pay a symbolic fee. It can go up to 15,000 euros. So I don't know what you mean with symbolic, but it can be consequential. And it has a lot of benefits, right? You get a high reputation, you have access to local networks. So it's like, it could work, why not? The point of this is like they wanted to make it easy, but as far as they make it easy and very accessible, it has a lot of different critics, right? And if after 2 consecutive years that you do not submit what you've been doing to get these 10 principles, you get delisted. So my question is like, how can we measure if this symbol is working or not on the standards on the industry? So in other words, what is the relationship of the United Nations Global Signature and the ESG performance? And we started to review the literature, that it has an extensive literature review. Global Compact has been an issue that has been treated by a lot of our colleagues. They have highlighted a lot of specific characteristics, but they're missing the impact. What are the actual impacts, and specifically on ESG performance? So that's why whenever we wanted to join a Global Compact with the database of Vigeo Eiris, I know that most of you are familiar with MCI, with Sustainalytics, but in our choices, we did spoke with the Vigeo Eiris because I think it's one of the most important extra financial rating agencies in Europe. I did my part of my PhD with them, and it was very interesting. And they have about 7,500 enterprises distributed in over 150 countries. And they're based on the ISO 26000 standards, ILO, OCDE, United Nations, PRI, as you know it. And how they work, they take the financial reports, they work on 6 domains: human resources, environment, human rights, community involvement, customer supplies, and governance, a little bit as ISO 26000. they started to create 38 different ESG criteria that they analyzed it on the 3 different pillars: politics, resources, and results. And they start to have a ponderation per sector based on materiality analysis. So I think that was very interesting to say. At the end, we have something like 342 items that have to be evaluated per year per enterprise, right? And with this, we have a global note that goes from 1 to 100. And we have also note per domain. So we can go deeper inside of our results. So we combine these two a little bit with doing a programmation algorithmics. We tried to use Excel, and then we were controlling this by hand. And at the end, what we could get, having the database from Global Compact and the database from Baigeo, it was a huge sample database. We have more than 7,000 enterprises. In general, we have more than 25,000 ESG nodes. Whenever we included 58 activity sectors with 17 years of observations about 66 countries. So that took a lot of time, but it's a great, I think it's one of the most important database, at least on this part of the literature. And our first hypothesis, like logically, we will think that global compacts will display a higher ESG performance, right? And that was the case. As you can see, there has been some differences, but at the end, the active members, whenever we compare it with the non-members, it can go up to 32% in average, in general, and this result is significant. So that was our, nothing really new here. We were just confirming hypothesis, and it was solid. Therefore, we started to move the analysis. And the second thing that we did with the linear regression, and then we can see how the slope for the members is positive, small but positive, while the slope for the non-members is negative. That means that members are doing efforts, continuous efforts, right? Small, but on the right direction, while non-members, it's like, I don't care, a little bit more, a little bit less, and then they're just going down. So they have a small but negative relationship of supplementary CSR efforts. Now, but specifically, what happened with the members before they sign and after they sign? So that was our key question. So we have rearranged this time dimension to a single base 7 dimension. From year 0 is going to be the Global Compact signature, and from for afterwards, we will get the years after the signature. And the first thing that we see is that the slope is positive. So that was a good sign. That means members have been working and they have worked after they have signed. So it seems to have a positive effect. And whenever we start to see specifically what was happening -3 years to 3 years, whenever as an enterprise, you know that you're going to sign this, you start to prepare. This is whenever you start to see, there's a little bit, we do more efforts before signing than after. And specifically, we see 1 year before, there's a little drop. It's in a stagnation. I don't know. I know that you cannot see it. That's what I did the next slide. And did you see after the first full year that you have signed the Global Compact, the biggest CSR initiative in the world, there's a slight and temporary drop on ESG performance. So this is the result that I wanted to speak with you today. My metaphor is like whenever you're on a diet and then you just want to show your beautiful body at the beach, the first day that you go to the beach, this night, you just eat a huge cake and get yourself some pleasure, right? So this is a little bit what we have found here. And it was specifically on the governance domain that is related with the control and audits that you do. So it's about the type of management, the management that you can get the first year that you get relaxed. So these get us to how can we just explain this significant but temporary? Remember, it's temporary. It's not going to be permanent. ESG performance. And this is whenever we would like to introduce the concept of symbolic surrogation. We're not speaking about finance. Here we're more on the strategic part of it, specifically on the ESG performance. And we have seen on the literature and specifically Harvard Business Review started to speak more about like, don't let metrics undermine your business. And we have the tendency to replace this strategy with metrics, as we have seen it on the other papers presented before. And whenever surrogation potentially hinders management's ability to make the good decisions, right? So like, I'm not going to take decisions. This symbol, I'm going to get it, and that's my decision. Well, it's not a strategy per se. We also can see that companies can lose this sight of the long-term strategy because you focus strictly on metrics, and in this case, on symbols. Literature about symbolic management, there's a huge Roman starts say like more than almost 40 something years ago, like this ceremonial conformity, right? It's something that you must have, and that's it. You make a ceremony out of this. We start to make expectations in appearance, but not in substance. And whenever you can manage the stakeholder perceptions for better, thanks to these symbols. So at the same time, we know that more and more CSR standards represents the body of an emergence, sometimes counterproductive consequences that might reduce the overall social performance for organizations. So our concept, it's a tentative definition, still in work. Symbolic social segregation is the tendency to temporarily replace ESG performance with well-established chambers for corporate social responsibility. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to get the symbols and see how it goes. And on this case, the example of the signature of the United Nations Global Compact. So this is, remember, this is not purely a surrogation because it's just a temporarily drop. Okay, and it might be a completely unintentional effect that we associated with a mental replacement for this surrogation mechanism that can replace a strategy, and this is whenever it gets dangerous. That's it. I think I just kept the time drawn. If so, I just want to discuss with you. What do you think? Do you think our interpretation is fine? If you have any theoretical frameworks that you can share with us, is there any possible partnerships to expand our research, our possible explanations, or if you have any other advice, it will be more than welcome. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Rodrigo. You did it in 11 minutes instead of 15. So you have an extra time for questions and answers. It's a quite challenging topic, United Nations. No, you know that they are changing now the strategy and also the memberships, and I guess it's not going to be so symbolic, the fee. So probably it's going to be an effect on some of your results. But let's see if there are any questions. Irina, thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. By the way, your brilliant presentation actually builds a very good bridge to what Yuri and myself are going to present today. My question is about, you are saying about symbolic management of ESG, symbolic measures on the top management side. How about symbolic monetization or capitalization? Do you have any hypothesis that this might be linked with the very kind of rather poor and fragmented monetization on the market side of what companies are doing?
That's a very interesting topic, Irina. I can say like we haven't explored that yet. We're like yet on the strategic inside of the enterprise, but that was exactly one of our further hints for research. What is happening on the market whenever this symbolic management and for how long this could happen, right? So yes, that's it's not something that we have gone through. It's in our side, and this is the possible next step. So thank you for mentioning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Adri.
Yes, thanks. Thanks so much, Rodrigo. I again, my remark is from experience, not academic, like Irina could well eloquently do. So my view is this: having worked on this type of topics in the past, a company makes a task force to make sure that they can deal up to the expectations. They work hard, they get all the flaws out, and the project's done, tick the box. Yeah, that's how it goes. And when it picks up again, because that's also from experience, is and again, and I'm not trying to get people to laugh, but it is like when you first have to fill in the questionnaire again, you think, oh, dearly beloved, we have to speed up a bit on this and that, and hey, so then you get this sort of, and then you get a positive circle. So to me, it's like with a car, with the old-fashioned gearbox, in between the second and third gear, or third and fourth gear, you have a bit of a hiccup. And I think that is what it is. So it's I would call it the gearbox governance intermezzo.
I love that, Bea. You're completely right. There's a learning curve. I agree. But what is interesting, this learning curve, it doesn't see it on the environmental side or on the social side.
Yeah.
Why on the governance? Because control and audits are, you're like, we just got the symbol, why doing another control? And this is what we call the surrogation. Like you're placing, it's part of your performance. You never know, not just because you get this type of symbol, that doesn't mean that you're not gonna get any problems in any other subject.
Yeah.
And that is the huge issue. But I agree with you, it could be the bigger issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Rodrigo.
Thank you. Jason.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Rodrigo, for the very nice presentation. So I was also really interested in the dip, and I think what's interesting for me is whether this is a statement or a question, like especially when you deal with things like, say, diversity and inclusion, and that actually deals directly with someone's behavior. And from what behavior takes a while to change. And so the sudden rise again is almost contrary to a human's behavior. So how would you address that going beyond this ticking another box when the next assessment comes?
That was a very good question, Jason. I would say patience, because those are learning networks. You're enabling. So if you don't see any results on the short term, you might leave. And that is the case. I didn't show you, but Global Compact members, they just last in average 45% less than 3 years. So half of the people, half of the organizations, they have signed, half of them, it's just a little bit what Adrian said. It's like we just signed with the commercial contract. We can show this on our website, but if we're not learning there because we are patient and we get to learn from the leaders from this sector, we just leave. So that's my opinion on this.
Great, thank you. Rashid, now it's your turn.
Yeah, Rodrigo, fascinating. I think, you were kind of touching on something that's kind of in a way very dear to me in the sense of what's really happening in the corporate world, right? To what extent what they say and what they do and what they really mean. And that's where the sense of purpose comes back to the fundamentals. Like, another experiment you might want to look into is the BRT statement of 2019, right? The top 200 companies basically said, we believe in stakeholder capitalism. We need to go beyond. But over the last 2 years, have they really made any tangible difference, right? I mean, that could be another experiment for you to do in parallel to what you have done to see, are they, meaning what they're saying? And maybe there's some data that perhaps in parallel could be done that I think would be quite interesting and quite useful.
Thank you, Rashid. Specifically, we ownership and purpose, we know that they're very, very interesting. And we still, the point is like how we translate these into data to measure either the difference or the relationship with them. But if you have any hints, I'll be glad to speak and develop this idea further along.
Yeah, I would like to get in touch with you and maybe talk about it.
Why not? Thank you, Rashid.
Great. Building network. This is part of what ABIS is about. So it's perfect. That's perfect. So let's move to the last paper. There are no more questions. Last paper, Irina Bakpina and Yuri Blagov. So.
Yes, Irina, we are waiting for our presentation on the table.
Does it come through?
Okay, we are waiting for, thanks to our brilliant moderator, we have enough time for everything. Thank you, John.
No, you have 15 minutes like everybody. Okay?
Sorry.
No problem. Take your time.
Does it come through now?
Okay, okay, it works. Well, let me start with a very brief introduction, and then I will ask my colleague to continue. First of all, our presentation, it's kind of practical part, or I can say spin-off of the PhD thesis prepared by my colleague Irina. Irina, let me ask you for the next slide, please. And actually, in this presentation, we are going to talk about kind of real business case. What we are trying to do, we try to develop and to introduce a methodology. methodology of assessment. But the peculiarity of this assessment is very simple. We try to connect as clear as possible ESG metrics with creating particular values through ESG, kind of business approach. And also, just to open our eyes, I'm from academia side purely, and Irina, not only from academia, but mainly from business side. For many years, she used to be chief environmental officer in several great international and Russian companies. And for her, even to create the green brand Slick a couple of years ago, was a part of her real business activity. If to talk about theoretical roots of the thesis and our presentation, we were thinking about three main pillars. First of all, about the general idea of self-evaluation, of self-regulation from the business side, which is connected to big disconnect idea. Second, we are thinking about a green product and try to based on the particular literature. And the last one, of course, a sustainable competitive advantage, because the very idea to translate or to transform ESG metrics into ESG values more or less should based on sustainability advantages or sustainable competitive advantage. And now, Irina, the floor is yours. Please continue.
Thank you. And just a few words to add on top of it. Obviously, as I already said, the companies quite often lose their interest, lose their cool, and maybe come back to symbolic management, as it was just mentioned earlier, because they don't see proper monetization of their efforts via products. Most of the ESG ratings and rankings which we've been looking at in the frame of this research are focusing on enterprise level, on the corporate level. And yes, most of these values which company create as part of the ESG activities are being praised somehow via capitalization, capitalization mostly on environmental side of ESG, and it was also mentioned earlier in today's research presentations. But when it comes to social attributes of ESG, quite often governance attributes of ESG, when it comes to real products, specifically consumer products on shelf, it's super difficult for companies today, for businesses to actually justify the investment which they already made or making into ESG transformation of their models. That's why we've looked at the two-phase self-evaluation methodology, which was developed by a group of experts in Russia behind the newly established Green Brands League, which united responsible manufacturers who really represented both B2B and B2C segments of the market, very interested in getting something more tangible for them to represent their ESG values as fundamentals for monetization for their customers. So first phase of the methodology obviously was focusing on enterprise level, where we looked at very traditional environmental, social impact, corporate governance aspects of every sector, quite universal attributes, let's say. On the second phase of the methodology, this is probably a unique and newly built on piece of research where it was suggested that we need to focus on product level and actually see material aspects or material attributes for every specific sector and focus on that. And they do not necessarily, they are not universal. So just to illustrate, for phase one, as I said, we used universal criteria normally used for ESG rankings and ratings. And for example, the evaluation or self-evaluation for the company which wanted to assess the maturity of their ESG transformation or ESG practices was built on the absence or existence of certain practices, certain regulatory documents inside the company, some evidence coming from the practices or cases which companies were sharing. Very traditional, nothing specifically new or adding to today's kind of science, right? But then if we look at the phase 2, then 15 sectors were identified, and with the help of experts representing businesses, real practitioners from every sector, the aspects which are most material for every sector in terms of ESG were identified, and specific weight for every aspect was allocated for us to be able to make a special formula to assess the ESG value for particular product, to differentiate ESG value of enterprise level from the ESG value of a product level, because sometimes we know it very well. There are companies with a wide range of consumer goods, from food side to, let's say, beauty or household side, or if it's a B2B business, it's a commodity kind of product, but it also differs in terms of the depth of procession. And it also requires some differentiation in terms of monetization when it comes to the customer. So for you to be able to appreciate what was done, actually, there are examples of sector-specific criteria, how they differ. So, for example, waste management aspect for different sectors was for energy here and for metallurgy and mining differs in terms of the depths, in terms of the questions themselves, and in terms of the assessment approach. So you may judge from this particular slide. Now, the evaluation formula included this way. We've looked at the aspect score in terms of ESG based on the number of criteria already allocated for particular aspect. As I said, it could be different from sector to sector and from aspect to aspect, obviously. And we also looked at the some of the actual scores which the company got behind different brands or behind different products. And this way we were able to shape overall representation of ESG value of a particular brand. So let me be more specific with the findings and with the examples on certain brands. So if you take, for example, foods and beverage sector, which is of most interest because it's particularly frontline consumer goods segment, the comparative ESG maturity evaluation of these two brands behind all aspects taken for this particular sector, not material, but all of them, which experts said they are applicable, looks like this. And you may see very vividly, even if the companies, for example, on ESG rankings will stay probably almost on the same level, for products, the whole picture holistically looks differently. Behind this 7-8 ESG aspects, we see different amount of priority which top managers allocate behind different ESG aspects of their product. And if we ask practitioners, who deal with the products every day or on a daily basis, if we ask people, let's say from retail segment, this particular analysis helps a lot to see that, for example, for Valio as a dairy product, the dairy brand probably needs to work much more on environment protection, because the average industry aspect is 2.8, but for this particular brand, it's far from the average. It's 0.2, and it provides certain amount of thinking for the management and for the customers as well. And if you will look at the beverage side of the slide, again, something is missing behind ethics and anti-corruption, for example, for this particular brand, whilst ethics for an alcoholic brand is probably one of the basic things. This is why this factor was for food and beverage put as a really kind of sector-specific aspect. The two factors which are difficult to monetize and therefore more attributable to corporate or enterprise levels, like social responsibility and accountability and transparency, they are highlighted over here on the left, top left-hand side of every chart, are taken here also as a reference, because our experts were saying that yes, for the food and beverage sector, we need to count them, they need to be there, but we fully appreciated that probably for the product, for the brand, is super difficult. And it's the next step of our research to see what are the ways to really make this effort paid back or, appreciated by the customers, because everything else is more or less fine to put on a packaging and to explain that this is the effort which needs to be paid for by the customers. Next slide represents
4 minutes, Irina, 4 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's almost still the probably last one or the one before the last one. This slide represents a clear analysis, only material aspects, so significant aspects for FMCG, for food and beverage part of FMCG were taken over here. We removed here social responsibility, we removed transparency, accountability, and just looked at the factors which do matter in terms of ESG evaluation, in terms of ESG transformation for particular products. And again, this representation helps a lot to see where the relevant impact is missing and where the effort should be made if this brand or if this product really wants to position itself and to be paid for it as a sustainable brand or a green brand. That's actually major logic of Russian Green Brands League. So the conclusions are exactly as Yuri Evgenich mentioned in the beginning, is that we were trying to offer through this particular case and through other cases which we are investigating and examining some really helpful methods for stakeholder audiences to assess not the corporate level, which sometimes is difficult to, punish with the money or punish with the pocket. We are not all of us are investors, let's say. So we are leaving enterprise level ESG to investment community or activists, but we are looking at the products on shelves, and for customers and consumers, this or methodology like this are helping to decouple corporate sustainability progress attributable to many brands, many services, and many different stakeholder groups from the ESG progress which is relevant to a specific brand. And we also are trying to help this way to compare various brands in the same sector. Even if a dairy product is difficult to compare, maybe relevant to compare versus a beer or beverage product, then we need to, this methodology can help put the same brand, the same product, the same category on the same shelf and compare them as well. It helps for executives and employees make and apply certain strategic focus, resource allocation decisions in the space of ESG transformation, see what are the gaps and what are the areas which really require attention. And also for opinion leaders and regulators, it may serve as a complementary ranking framework, again, on an industry by industry basis. If you aggregate this data and look at all of the dairy brands in your pipeline and all beverage brands in your pipeline, it may help you really identify some of the gaps. Why, for example, antitrust or anti-corruption policies are missing massively in this particular segment. So this is something where regulators may apply their focus and look how to fix that. So this is probably it on our side, and we, I hope, are open for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina. Let's see if there is a question there. Thomas?
Irina, thank you very much, and great to see you here again.
Great to see you too, Tom.
When you look at ESG, and you had a chart where you said E8, S4, G8, would you agree to a statement that social is still dragging behind, still needs more investment? I mean, a lot of companies and organizations focus on environment, governance as well, but the social, and you had one of these charts here, is dragging behind.
Exactly. Yeah.
Would you agree to that, or how would you comment on that?
That's exactly what I mentioned when presenting this methodology. And we struggled when these groups of experts were gathering together and practitioners were exchanging their views. People in the business do struggle how to monetize social investment. That's why they do tend to refrain from it. They do tend to only take into account things which really can be monetized when it comes to ESG value proposition of a particular product. That's why most of the focus, unfortunately, on S part of ESG applies to suppliers. This is much easier because, you know, you look at the suppliers, you look at the ethical codes of them, you include them into your value chain assessment. It's easier. But when it comes to your own employees, when it comes to salaries, we just heard from one of a colleague earlier, when it comes to huge gap between top management and tri-level benefits in the companies, even if the companies start doing it, they still struggle with the concept. How do we then come back to the society, and what do we ask in return? How are we praised for this effort? Is it like a license to operate, which they keep with us? Or what is the mechanisms to keep the business really involved and interested, engaged into this particular thing?
Yeah, great input. Juan, if I may, quick question after that. I'm doing a lot of work with small, medium businesses. The interesting thing is when I look at ESG and so on, that social part, employees, is really the key part for small, medium businesses. But sometimes it seems like the environmental part is more important for large corporations, for MNCs and so on. Would you agree with your research on that one? Because actually small, medium companies, it could be, I don't know, an optical store somewhere in the middle of Moscow. They have nothing, they have a little bit of environmental stuff, but in the end, they take care of their people. So the social part is much higher. So do you see an imbalance between environmental at large corporations and social in small, medium businesses or so? Has some of your research shown some of that?
Thomas, I mean, we prefer to look at the ESG through the value chain lens. This helps indeed. It helps you balance it throughout the value chain. The companies which extract resources, material resources from the earth, obviously will be kind of mostly squeezed to environmental part of ESG. But then whatever we provide as a material resource to the processors and then to the retailers of, as you say, optic shop or whatever it is, we have aluminum probably in their products, then we are accountable for this piece of the value which is created. But then for small and medium-sized businesses, most of values they create are through people. They don't extract materials or minerals, but they should be more maximum responsibly with the intellectual capital which they produce or kind of supply on the market through services. That's why obviously they will be squeezed more into social kind of part of the ESG equation. But then if you look at that's why I am so keen to look at the ESG through product and through consumer, because every one of us is part of a big, huge value chain, and we either invest into it or disinvest, or, you know, grow or degrow it somehow through our activities. If you look through the product and the value throughout the whole value chain, I truly believe it should be balanced.
Okay, great, thank you.
Out.
We have time for
let me
one more question or a couple of
just briefly, let me add just several seconds. Well, Thomas, thank you very much for your question. And actually, Irina already told that there are two levels here. We are not only trying to compare big businesses and the small ones. The most important point, the level of analysis. On the level of product, whether we like it or not, environmental part is much more important for customers. You know, actually, it's kind of phenomena of our research. Thank you.
Good. Is there any question? No, everybody's happy. Okay, great. Thank you for all your participations and contributions. You make my work very easy also. You were very obedient and on time. I see some trend in all your presentations, going back to the last discussion, the last comments. ESG, it seems that there is a lot on E. Probably it's also the one that is more already measured. You have more metrics. We have also more regulation, maybe. So it's easy to measure, and it's easy to make it very, very specific. And it seems to me that there is a lot of work to be done on S and G also, as some of you said before, no? And we have to work a lot on S and G. Otherwise, we are caring for a world, but we are not caring for the people that is living in this world, right? Which is some kind of paradoxical, no? So let's here put some also insistence on this couple of points, the S and the G. So thank you very much for your papers and your presentations. I really encourage you to keep working on them. I hope also that you will send a manuscript for the special issue that we are organizing for the conference, for the colloquium, and hope to see you soon around and personally, see if these crazy times are getting better and we can finally meet together, right? So thank you very much. Now there is at the bottom right of your screen, there is a button that says something like exit the room, something like that. Probably we link there. If we click there, we will go back to the main room and to keep our conversation there. So thank you very much, and a big applause to all of you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.